All right, welcome back to another episode of Raise 'Em Up, podcast all about those who are interested in raising up kids in the faith, walking alongside of kids, and we get the joy of being able to read some books about it. And I'm having the joy of having one of my favorite books right now, Spiritually Vibrant Home. And Tracy, good to have you back.
Thank you.
Had a little bit of a guest last week with Kyle. Kyle loved our episode last week, by the way.
Good.
So much so that he was like, I need this book.
Right.
So I immediately was like, hey, I have an
have a
extra copy
copy.
of the book. Here you go. But he was so convicted by it.
Right. Well, I'm super glad to be back. I missed y'all last week.
We missed you.
Yeah, we missed you too. And so I bet our listeners missed you too. So we have an interesting chapter. It's kind of this giant pregame for the conversation the whole way through. So we've had the intro, which definitely introduced us to a lot of different things. We had that opening chapter that kind of talked about the vulnerability that just comes with having the conversation about our homes.
Mm-hmm.
You had my favorite chapter, Tracy, last week with the biblical basis for the homes. And just again, how the word shows us so much about how God designed us. And then you have this again, I call it a pregame because the things that are on the front of the cover, messy prayers, loud tables, open doors, those chapters start next, okay? So next episode, there might even be some people listening going, I just want to get to it. And well, next week, yeah, you can get it. Or if you're listening to this in the future, like 10 years from now, you could just go to that one if you want to. I'm not offended at all. But we have one more kind of pre-conversation to have where they really dive in a little bit deeper about how they understand. How do we even know that these three things are what are happening behind the doors of spiritual vibrancy? So as you guys entered in this chapter, or as you look back on it, what is standing out to you the most as you look at pulling back the curtain of the spiritually vibrant home?
I just liked the way that the research that they shared in the chapter showed us that all different types of households, all different numbers of people, ages of people, different places where they live, regions, all of it showed that people can be having spiritually vibrant homes no matter any of those other factors. So if you're a single household, you're living with a roommate, you're empty nesters, all of these people have been, what's the word I'm looking for?
Found spiritual vibrancy.
They found spiritual vibrancy, but they took part in these polls and they took part in this research. And so they found people who are at all of these different stages, all of these different places, and all of them were able to achieve spiritual vibrancy using these three main things that are part of the subtitle of this chapter: the power of messy prayers, loud tables, and open doors. And it kind of just goes into what they found and why they call it messy prayers, loud tables, and open doors. So I really liked that.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. So again, for the listener, we might have covered this in the introduction chapter 1 a little bit, but basically you have an organization called Barna. So even at the top of the book, you see that word Barna, featuring original research from Barna. Barna is I want to call them a worldwide organization, but a big organization that really is just studying things for the sake of the church. And when I say the church, I mean that big C, cross-denominational, not linked to any particular denomination, is really trying to do the research and the data. I mean, I'm telling you, I'm an analytical person, and I think reading, for instance, Households of Faith, which is their pretty version of the summary of their data, is a little tedious, okay? so that shows you the kind of research that they do, the kind of data that they gather. And so what's really cool is this chapter, again, Don does such a great job of taking Households of Faith, recognizing what Barna has done, their partnership with Lutheran Hour Ministries, because Lutheran Hour Ministries did partner with Barna for this one. Again, Barna's not a Lutheran organization, but they partnered with one. And that's where we got to. And so what was interesting was my favorite part then, kind of connecting to yours, was where did they find these families, or who are these families? And they weren't just surveying every household that was out there. They strictly were surveying households that considered themselves. So it's not even, because it was interesting, you were saying they found.
Right.
Well, actually, all they were looking for was people who would survey themselves as having, I wrote it down in my notes, would strongly agree that faith is important to them. All right, that's it. That's the original question. And then they go and dive deep into each of those homes. And what they found was it wasn't just the nuclear family, which was kind of the cool surprise. And actually, let's go ahead and look at pages 67 to 69, have a lot of the important kind of charts in this chapter. So of those ones that said that, surprisingly, only a quarter, 25% were from a nuclear family household. that said strongly agree. Okay. And then roommate household was 17%, along with other, which I'm always interested in what that means. And then couple household was 14, multi-generational was 12, single parent was 12. All right. And then the final one there was grown-up nuclear family household. And I appreciate how they do this. This is the research of Barna did this too. But I appreciate this just because even in our church right here, and anybody listening, you can think about your own congregation. We have multiple households represented. Now, at a place like Trinity Klein, we have a wonderful school. We have wonderful kids programs, wonderful stuff for your youth, right? But we still have in the family all sorts of different households. So I appreciate how they kind of identified the different primary types, and then apparently other accounts for about 17. And certainly that's going to include the single households.
I was going to say that would probably be at least single households, plus some other mixture of things. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I just appreciate that so much, especially like the difference between a nuclear family household and a grown-up nuclear family household, because there's just different challenges that you face at every step of the way there. But again, to see, while yes, nuclear family household was 25%, you still have very strong representation from everywhere else.
Yeah.
So I thought that was so if you're sitting out there going, okay, well, like you've been listening, and that's maybe why there's so many pre-game chapters, I'll call them, on this. And so anything kind of stand out to you, you turn the page, and it also talks about types of neighborhoods, okay? Or types of household by generation is on there as well. Anything stand out to you as you look at those pages for our listeners?
I'm just amazed at the diversity in it all, like the whole way through. And I think also when we talk about spirituality, maybe, or what that looks like in our homes, it's like they quantify it here. And that's interesting to me because sometimes it's more about what we feel, or it's not something that we think
hard to
about.
nail down.
Yes, it's not something that we think about being able to be represented in graphs and things. But here they really did do a good job of putting that in a picture that's like, oh, okay, I see where that's represented in the larger population. I like the one that I'm a nerd about generations,
Sure,
right? Just
yeah.
being dealing with teenagers as much as I do. I think this is very interesting, and I think there's a lot more to be said for the differences among generations when it comes to how we talk about, feel, experience our own spirituality, and within our family, our spirituality. So that was very interesting to me.
Well, and just for those that are listening and not looking directly at the page, like what do you see here about the household type by generation?
Yeah, so on this page, it represents out like teens, millennials, Gen X, boomers, and then elders, which I always think, that's an interesting category in and of itself, because so much of what our traditions in our family are kind of seeping down from that generation that maybe we don't even have close contact with on a daily basis. It's a very small population in this chart, but they talk about the nuclear family household as being primarily teens. That's almost 50% nuclear family household that's there that was in their research was 49%. And then the Gen X is 30%, and then the millennials is 18%. And then you have the boomers at 2%, which was such a small number to me. And then as you change from that nuclear family, then that boomer population gets bigger. So I just thought that was interesting. I wouldn't have expected that, I don't think.
Well, and another striking thing just about that nuclear family breakdown is that the one group that's not represented is elders.
Right.
Sure.
So in the nuclear family, we're missing an entire generation that's represented in the research. So it's just interesting to see who's got influence in these different types of households. Teens have a big impact in nuclear families, and so do obviously millennials and Gen X. Their parents, but it just is surprising that the elders, they're a very big portion in couple households. Well, yeah, because it's probably couples
Empty
caring
nesters.
for, an older relative, a parent.
Yeah.
And so, thinking about your household, again, you're represented here. But also maybe it's just kind of a call out, like, who are you missing in your household? Like, what is there a generation that's
sure.
underrepresented? I don't know. I think that's interesting.
I think what I appreciate it is a very Gen X thing that Gen X oftentimes gets attributed to not having a place or being able to be pegged down because they're the in between of the boomers and the millennials, not fully millennials. And so a lot of Gen Xers will call themselves Zennials because they kind of get millennials, but they have this whole 80s vibe going on for yourselves. And you guys are represented across the board pretty much equally.
They're everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
So 30% nuclear, 29% Gen X in the single parent household, 28%
They're
in the
everywhere.
multi-generational. And then it differentiates a little bit, but you're still 20, 15, and 25 in roommate, couple, and others. And then somewhat similar to millennials, except for millennials, our place is the roommate household, it seems, was our big representation. There were 39%, like overwhelmingly in that category. Again, you guys have mentioned Gen Z is primarily in a nuclear family, but also in a single parent and multi-generational. And then outside of that, it's somewhat not spoken of. And then you have those boomers who are primarily in the couple households, the kind of empty nester situation and things like that. And elders, that's where they primarily are at as well. And other than that, statistically speaking, it's irrelevant. So it's interesting, just the dynamics of those and recognizing those. And I appreciate what you guys have brought out about, okay, let's ask that question. Who's involved in my household? Who can I bring through my household? And things like that. Because to some extent, this is definitely talking about, as we talked about in the first chapter, I think it was, not the introduction, but episode 2 of this book, was that core household. Who's in the core household right now? So to some extent, too, I can get why elders aren't in the nuclear because that would be multi-generational at that point, which I deeply appreciate, and I hope I can make that happen. But I recognize how much of a challenge it is to really truly be that multi-generational house too.
Well, and I think too that those generations that are caring for the elders, if you see like the couple household that has the 22% of elders in the house, that's a time in your life where it's hard to care for elders and raise a family of teens. Like life is busy. Those are families who are primarily having to outsource that care or get help in another way. And I think it's kind of indicative of, if you look at that, like your house is most chaotic in that first column.
Oh,
absolutely. You know? And I think that's where you're less able to have those multi-generational households in an effective way.
Sure.
You know,
I appreciate too. I mean, it talked about over here. If you talked about spiritual vibrancy, I think most people would say it belongs in the suburbs, and to some extent, you're that is first place, 40%, but close second, 32% is urban. Okay, so those are great places, and then 18% rural, 10% small town.
I was shocked at the small town. Like, to be honest with you, I felt like that really surprised me, because I felt like maybe it's idyllic or what we see on TV or what we kind of imagine happens in little small towns. But I just thought, everybody's sitting around a table in a small town, open doors, like neighbors popping in, I don't know, small towns just really seem like
population,
It's
right?
population,
Because most people aren't. When you look at, especially like the nuclear family households, most of those are residing in the suburban areas. So you don't have as many people living
in small towns
in
to make
those
up that
small
population.
towns
Yeah.
to make up I don't think it's necessarily that the percentage of people in those areas.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? It's
Are
not
not,
the percentage of people in those areas. Probably if you said, okay, the percentage of people in the suburban neighborhoods and the percentage of people in the small town neighborhoods.
You get a
so
baseline.
notice,
Right.
but notice what they're saying though. So what this is again the spiritually vibrant. So if they identified themselves, and I think then I would ask Barna the question of, how much outreach did you have to rural areas? Did you have to small town areas?
Because
Like,
that's
for
how
them to
I
be able to
read it.
Respond.
Yeah.
Like that was my thing. So it was just overall the people that responded. So I wonder how much.
Yeah.
See, that's the data.
Because
nerd
only
stuff I'll get into.
10% of people said they had spiritually vibrant homes, right?
No.
Oh, no.
What it means is that as you're looking at the charts, it's like there were 2,700 people who responded to the survey and said that spirituality is important to them. Of those 2,700 people, 10% lived in a small town, 32% lived urban, 40% lived
Yeah,
suburban.
and again, the language was strongly agreed that faith is
Yes, faith is important.
So I think
to
it's just
them.
the people that responded.
Yeah, so maybe
I
it
think
was an
this is-
outreach thing.
Right. Right. I
Yeah.
think this is
Yeah,
probably
so-
just representative of where our populations actually live, which I love that for a couple reasons. Because, like you said, we have this imagining, this kind of like, okay, here's what a spiritually vibrant home looks like. And maybe we picture that
Right.
small
that's true. No,
town,
that's
and
a
here it
great
is.
point.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I love that Jesus like flips everything we think we know on its head all the time.
Right.
And he works in ways that we don't expect. And I think that this is a good call out. Like, you don't have to live in a small town with a white picket fence and a big
Right.
giant house to have
Yes.
spiritual vibrancy.
I guess that's where my head was going when I saw the 10% small town. I didn't think about it being a sampling issue,
Right.
but yes, that for sure is what you imagine. The little,
Yeah.
you know, leave it to beaver type.
Yes.
Right.
You
And
know?
it's
Right.
possible that in a small town of, 1,200 people, that 90% of them are spiritually vibrant. But when you compare that to a giant
Right.
city like Houston, and then the
Yeah.
percentages are just skewed that way.
Skewed.
Yep. So if Luthenauer or Barna are listening to this podcast,
think about it.
send us an email at Raise 'em Up Podcast at Trinity Klein.
Right.
Or is it Raise 'em Up? No, it's not Raise 'em Up Podcast. Oh, I messed up our email. It's okay. Raise 'em Up at TrinityKlein.org to clarify all issues, and we'll cover it in a Q&A on this book. Yeah.
Inquiring minds would like to know.
Exactly. But I do appreciate too, you kind of thank you for bringing in Jesus to the conversation, because like it is kind of interesting where and how he carries out ministry. Because I think some people would try and go so far as to say, "Oh, and I just said that with such a tone, didn't I?"
You did.
Oh man,
Some
that is
people.
such a judgmental tone. But some people would say like, "Oh, Jesus spent most of his time in this setting, so that's where we need to go." But the cool thing I see is Jesus spent his time in every setting.
Right.
Every one of these settings we're talking about, every urban, suburban, small town,
Right.
every piece of Israel gets touched at some point. Every type of household gets touched at some point as well. And it's really, really neat to be able to see that. Again, this value upon every setting we could possibly see as we kind of, especially think about our own journeys. And basically, well, here's the whole purpose, right? We've gotten so into the data, which is good, but we're trying to pull back the curtain of a spiritually vibrant home. And so those that are listening are going, okay, guys, you told us that every single one of these people said that faith is important to them, right? What did they find? What did they see when they zoomed in? And I think there were some quotes that particularly stood out to me that I certainly wanted to read here. Page 72, it said, it's one thing to know, right, that there are Christian households out there, out there that have strong and active faith, but it's quite another to have extensive interviews and surveys that allow us to spend time looking inside of their homes, right? And I think this is the typical, like where we allow spirituality to be something that is seen on the surface, or we talk about, you should read your Bible, you should pray. There are other people that are really good at reading their Bible and praying. I'm like, okay, thanks. But the zoom in, and I really appreciate it too. We haven't even talked about Gene and his wife,
Jerry.
Jerry.
Gene and Jerry.
Gene and Jerry.
Yet, right? Because that was kind of how Don introduced this chapter to us, was this couple that he had heard about. He'd heard all about how great they were, how marvelous they were. And seriously, like, you sit there and go, as a church worker, there's a piece of me that's like, what's your secret, Gene and Jerry?
need to
That's
lead a
major
class.
intimidating. I'm like, I will never be Gene and Jerry.
Right.
And for those
It
listening,
is not going to happen.
Yeah. For
Right.
those
I'm just gonna
listening
be
who haven't
honest.
heard the chapter or haven't read the chapter, Gene and Jerry are this couple who lived near a college town, and they were kind of famous as being open to the college students and just like having a revolving door of students coming in and learning about Jesus and eating food, and then also reaching out within the community to provide opportunities for work at their house for people who maybe were unemployed and needed to get back on their feet. So they were the superstars of hospitality and spiritual vibrancy.
And that's the thing, is it wasn't just the relationships. It wasn't just that they were popular.
Right.
Like they did things.
Impactful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gene raised the money to buy a remote retreat center in the Rockies. College students came from all over to hear more about Jesus.
And he was like a full-time real estate agent
Yeah. I'm saying,
and all this other stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was the relationships. I mean, like when the guy goes to I can't think of his name. I'm horrible with names. When
Don,
Don
you're
goes
good.
to interview him, like the guy walks in and you can tell, this guy's looking like he's in a rough point in life, right? And Gene welcomes him in. Hey, come on in. Knows him by name. Every kid that was
He was
in
doing
that
a hardware
house,
run
he
for him.
knew them by
Yeah.
name.
Yeah. And so
which
that,
is amazing.
and that was kind of Don's point, was saying like, hey, we'd heard about Gene. It was an entirely different thing though to go and experience Gene's household and what they did. And it was just really impactful for him because by the time that Don got to visit him, he was in his
80s. And it
He's
was
in his
still
80s.
still had college students coming in and hanging out at his house.
Yep.
That's amazing. And you said, as a ministry person, I want to know what's your secret. But that's what stood out to me. He wasn't just a ministry person.
No.
Like he was a real estate agent,
Member of the
and
community.
and he just decided that our home is going to welcome people, and we are going to find ways to connect to the people right around us, which for them was a college campus. And then I'm amazed. I'm amazed at what people are capable of doing with God's help when they just say, this is something that's important to the Lord, and so this is something that we're going to prioritize.
My dad always tells a story about his father was a Pentecostal preacher, and in the 50s and 60s, they lived on the east side of Houston and in a popular neighborhood. Where there's a lot of growth in that area, and it was popular, I guess, like door-to-door salesmen at the time. So,
Jesus
vacuum
movement,
cleaners and handing out pamphlets, a lot of variety of denominations, the Jehovah's Witnesses and, Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints would come around the neighborhoods trying to get people to join the churches that were coming up around this growth. And my dad said that there was never a time that somebody knocked on their door that it didn't involve coming in. Like, if you want to talk to me, come in
sure.
and sit down at our table.
Interesting.
And there was always a Bible on the table. And he said that it would turn into hours sometimes of just chatting and talking. And if they brought up something, if it was about a church and they brought something up, he would say, let's dive into that. And it would turn into a more holistic approach to a Bible verse than just maybe a marketing ploy, So
Absolutely.
my grandfather got known for, don't try to sell something to Mr. LeMaster because it will involve a half a day in his home talking about the Bible and God's plan for you, So that kind of mentality of, it's not just a pop-in, it's not a one thing, it's not just sharing a pamphlet with you, it's really digging in and talking about what you need and what I know.
Oh, yeah. I love that because it's not transactional.
Yes.
I mean, most of the time when we open our doors to people who are showing up, it's, if it is
Right.
a salesman or
Right.
anything like that, or the people behind the counter at the
Sure.
place where you get your
Yeah.
coffee, it's transactional.
Yeah.
But how many of us actually take the time to turn it to relational
Right.
and check in with those people and how they're doing and what they need?
Yeah. And my dad's dad passed away when he was in high school. He was a senior in high school. And my dad said he remembers so many faces that had been to their home just one time, like for something that was
gift.
unrelated, like
Yeah.
selling a vacuum cleaner, but that they were impacted by my grandfather in that way because of that not being transactional, being a relation that they built, So that this kind of part of Gene and Jerry kind of reminded me of how that's something that's pretty rare, you know, for people to really open their doors to strangers and just come in and let's talk.
And I'll push it a step further. I mean, like, because especially talking about transactional relationships, I mean, there's a level to which what God is throwing in front of my face, is what
Yeah.
I'll say, is the recognition that a lot of our relationships, and when I say a lot, I mean probably 90 to 95% of our interactions are transactional. And I'm guilty of this.
Absolutely.
Right?
Me
I mean,
too.
I'm certainly, I call this time of the year, which I won't give away to our listeners, but this time of the year is one of the busiest for me. I mean, I have
Meetings
missed
and-
3 staff meetings in a row because of commitments. I've missed 3 two-year-old chapels in a row because of commitments. And thankfully, people are stepping in, people understand, but it's just nonstop at this time of the year. And so what happens is very much, like even downstairs this morning, I was reading my chapter, taking my notes, getting ready for the podcast, and people would walk into the office, and it was very much, good morning, and go right back to my book, right? And things like that. I mean, think about like church. I mean, this is where we all have work to do, of when we pass someone in the grocery store. I'm so guilty of this too, of just, oh, hey, yeah, that's right. I know you, and we're in the grocery store. But then I think, for me at least, a lot of insecurities come in that like, oh, I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to do all this stuff. And certainly true when someone comes to our door,
Yeah.
right? Well, let's just call it the door of our life. Like, we don't want to waste their time, and just a lot of
A lot of
places.
it's, I
We
don't want
wanna
my
waste
time.
my
I got too many things to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so there's a layer to which there's a challenge. And so I'm reading another book with another group right now that I recently, when trying to formulate what I was thinking, said it this way. I believe that the American church, right? Because I do think it's Western, right? When we say Western, European, like what the world we live in, the culture, Christians oftentimes are chasing an American pace, which is completely foreign to Scripture.
Yes.
It's a phrase that's really stuck with me. It might be a phrase at the time that someone's listening to this, they've heard me say that before, because it really has, like, that realization alone has drastically changed my approach. And I know it's a problem. Like, I know that rest, for instance, and like what that means for our families, for our homes, for these kiddos that we're trying to raise up in the faith is going to be crucial. They don't know what it means to stop. They don't know what it means to be, you know, and to let God be God in those moments too. And to be frank, like, the realization for me recently was, Lee, you don't know it either. Because you live in that culture. You live in that go attitude, that go world. And so you also have to take a step back and learn what that means. And so there's a lot of great personal growth that I'm looking forward to right now.
I had a mentor once say to me, imagine what your life would be like. And this was kind of at the time of my life where both of my kids were very involved in things. My husband was also kind of at that middle age of getting a new career started and advancing his career, very busy. I was very busy with work. And she said to me, imagine what your life would look like if you chased Jesus the way you're chasing everything else right now.
That's awesome.
And I remember I grappled with that for weeks. Like it kind of was like a spotlight onto my, what I was preoccupied with. And when she said, like, you know, just being too busy, like there was definitely that phase of my life where I would have ducked my head and tried to go to a different aisle at the grocery store if I saw somebody from church or school, right? And not because I wanted to be, you know, rude, or just simply because I was tired of engaging. I was at a place where it was like, I need a little bit of quiet time at the grocery store, you know?
Right.
So if a parent came up to me, it was not my first instinct to be welcoming or to say, how are you? Or what's been going on? It was more like, oh my gosh, this is going to really take my quiet time from me, you know? And I think oftentimes we find, especially at certain phases, I think you can do it when your kids are very little as well, where you just get through a whole day and you think, where did I have Jesus today? You know, we have so many things to do on our checklist. And I think if our checklist was more geared to that, it is transformational when we are seeking Him, no matter what else is on the checklist, right?
Exactly. And as we continue to work through this book with this other group, like we're going to get to that. But the challenge is kind of are you spending enough time with God to sustain your work for Him? Because it's specifically speaking to church workers, but it's true for all of us as disciples. If you're never resting, and this is a really important conversation of rest to have, but like I think a lot of times we get it backwards in the West, in America and Europe, and then we think that we rest from our work, right? I mean, because like I'll use an athlete as an example, because a lot of people can typically relate to an athlete. You go to play a game, and what do you need to do afterward? You need to rest. But flip it this way. I want you to imagine all you do is train and train hard. You have a game on Friday. You train hard Monday. You train hard Tuesday. You train hard Wednesday. You train hard Thursday. You train hard Friday morning. And then you go to play your game Friday night. How are you going to perform?
Yeah, you're tired.
Exhausted.
You're exhausted.
From an empty
done.
tank.
You're done, right? So even in something like that, our physical bodies tell us how important it is to rest. And that from that rest, we get to work. It's not rest from our work. It's work from our rest. You know, it's not original to me. I heard it from Mike Breen the first time in a book. I didn't hear it from Mike Breen. Yeah.
But you're still right. It's where is our time? Like, where is our time focused? Because what they found in this research, going back to the specific research, was that exemplar Christian households regularly participate in applying spiritual disciplines. So that is your Bible study, your quiet time, your prayer, engaging in spiritual conversations. So being open to talking about God within the household, and then extending hospitality. So if you're extending hospitality all day long,
You're missing the other two.
you're missing the other two, and that is going to decrease your spiritual vibrancy. So I think about like my daughter's asking to get into a couple more activities, and I'm thinking about it like I would love to have her to be able to do those things. But I turned in the car and I said to her, in our family, we do one activity at a time.
Nice. Bringing in the sticky face.
And I did. I thought,
Nice.
and she said, well, why? We have this night open and this night open and this night open. I said, yes, but I want you to be able to play with your brother and for us to have meals together and for us to, and it was like, yeah, if, I can say yes to so many things, and I do say yes to so many things, but I need to draw in some boundaries so that we're not just focusing in on one of these avenues that is, hospitality or whatever. Like we have to have a balance of personal spiritual discipline, conversations within the home, and hospitality.
Yeah. And as the book summarizes, messy
prayers, loud tables, and open doors. I always want to say messy tables because it makes me feel better.
We can have both.
Well, and for anybody
be
that's
messy
listening,
and loud.
anybody listening that wasn't with us for the Sticky Faith journey, one of those chapters, another reason to go back and listen to those episodes or read that book was that line of "in our family."
In our family,
Yeah.
in our house, we do this.
Right.
Yeah.
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 Well,
it was a
I
very
didn't
powerful
read the
statement.
Sticky Faith yet, but I've said I need to. And that's something with my kids both in college and out of the house. Jeff and I managed to stick to that policy of we do one sport at a time, one activity at a time. And I got probably, if I look back to one thing I got the most push on, it was that.
Yeah.
Well, why can't you guys do this? Or we really would like I had one daughter that was very athletic, involved in sports, and she was constantly being dragged into that conversation of you could do this and that. And she would come to me with all of these lists of reasons why it was good to do that. And I remember one time she was in 6th grade and we tried it, and it wrecked our life for 6 months. We committed to it. We paid for it. I mean, you know how those go. So we committed to that. And I remember thinking so much was hindered because we added that one more thing that really took away. For us, it was meals together. We were having to divide up. And so we were eating a lot in transit, in the car. We weren't sitting down around our table together. And at the end of that 6 months, even our kids said, we missed eating together, you know? And so I think when you kind of can do an inventory like that, when you're in the midst of it and say, what are we not willing to sacrifice? And these kind of spiritual practices, when you sacrifice them, the negative is long lasting and the positive is impactful in the moment right away.
And I think there are so many families listening right now that can resonate with everything you just said. And Melanie, the line that you used from Sticky Faith of in our family, in our home, is not just impactful when you're talking to your kids, but it's impactful when you're talking to coaches, when you're talking to people that lead these activities. And so I think all the time, and again, it's not to place blame, it's just calling out the situation. So many times that something we put our mission trips and our student ministry trips on the calendar at the beginning of the year, like the beginning of the school year, so you know when they're coming. And lo and behold, it's always going to happen. Like, I mean, even with our mission trip, I think of how many people will drop in the last 2 weeks because something else will come up, a coach or a teacher. And again, my tone is giving away how I feel about this.
Well, you and I have talked about this with my situation with high school basketball,
Oh, yeah.
And that there was something that was very important to a lot of our students here.
Absolutely.
Right. And my daughter was always
I was
on
thinking of the summer, but you're right.
But that January time was always such a conflict for so many kids in our circle of high school athletes, because the pressure of, I really want to experience this situation of going to this camp and having that spiritual connection, but I also am committed to this team and I don't want to let anybody down.
Exactly. And that's the pressure, is letting people down or missing an opportunity, because we'll build up certain things like that, and being able to say to a coach, and thankfully, not all coaches are built equally, right? So I had some families that would share, well, in our family, we value this retreat, or in our family, we value this trip. And again, it's not just coaches, but there's other organizations or fun activities out there too. And just being able to have that boundary with them and saying that line is like
Yeah.
basically if they're going to challenge that,
Yeah.
they're challenging your family values.
And we're not saying this to shame anybody who's
Right.
in a season.
Absolutely.
And,
No,
and
I've
to
been
equip.
there.
we're
Yeah.
all coming from a place where we would like your kids to be involved in the activities
Right.
that we
Yes.
lead. You know,
And
we,
I will say-
we have those extracurriculars
Yeah.
where we do want our students to have these opportunities and
Yeah.
connect and
But I will say too, as a mom who, like when my child was going through confirmation, right? She had committed to a team, and they had practice on Wednesday nights, and and I was like, okay, so
It's tough, yeah.
But so what did we do? Well, we do it at home. Right. So we don't go to confirmation, but we did it at home together. So sometimes it's figuring out what works, because our programs at church are amazing, and our mission trips and those things are amazing. And we do a Wednesday night with kids. We do a Wednesday night kids grow groups, and I love it. My kids never participated in it because for my kids, when they were younger, dude, anything on a school night, that was hard.
Very hard,
They,
yeah.
when they played sports at the beginning of middle school in 5th and 6th grade, practice was right after school. So they're still home for dinner and things
Right.
like that. But for my kids, any change to that nighttime routine just totally threw them out. And then those poor
Right.
teachers on Thursday mornings.
Yeah.
So I think there are some things that work differently for different families.
families.
So I don't
Families,
feel like
sure.
we have to say you have to, you
Right.
you
Follow
can't be
this
on a sports
specific
team if
schedule,
it's not
yeah.
right. And my husband and I were talking because my 17-year-old she's a junior getting ready to be a senior, and right now sports is huge. I mean, she's on a travel team, and it's great. And we look at it and I'm like, oh my goodness. And even my 13-year-old was like, I don't ever see Peyton anymore. And there are times that we don't. When we're home, we have our dinners together. And I think that's what we've always done. And she's like, where is she? She's not here. It's just 3 of us. And it's hard.
Yeah.
But then I look and I'm like, but we are learning different skills, right? And she is still on Sunday night meeting with her crew group, and you know what I mean? So I think it's very hard.
It is hard.
And as your kids are growing and your families, and my kids have only ever done one thing at a time. I'm like, great, you want to play a sport? That is your sport.
Right.
You're not playing two.
Well, I can tell you that a lot of these conversations actually prepare you for your children to leave the nest. Too.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
Because
Just saying the
that
same
is
thing.
part of that high school experience. I remember I had a teacher who was a few years behind me with where her kids were, and she said, I feel like I just don't see my kids very often anymore, and it's just so hard. And I said, well, I feel like that's the way life works for families, that you have these phases where you have to learn what is it like to be a family of 3? Because when your 17-year-old leaves for college, you will be a family of 3 around a
Absolutely,
table.
yeah.
And the dynamics change somehow, the way you interact with each child will be different when it's just you around the table with them. So it is all kind of part of that preparation for your heart and your home to learn. We look different at different times, and we're still that nuclear family. I wondered when we looked at that chart, like, well, where am I? My kids don't live in my
sure,
home,
yeah.
but they're still my nuclear family.
Sure.
I mean, we talk every day. I beg them to come home as much as possible. This weekend, I will have everyone under one roof for the
Right.
first time since Christmas. And it's like you think about, okay, that's it. Like that's what I look for. But just when that's gone, I still have to have all these other things. And that's tough for Jeff and I, to be honest with you. It's tough for us to still sit and do devotions. I'm a devotion, you know me. I'm a devotion queen. And my kids maybe were captive audiences for me over the years. Like they didn't really have a choice to say, no, I'm watching the football game right now. It was like, this is devotion time, come sit down. But Jeff and I, it's like, it was weird for us to do that together without the kids.
Yeah.
Like it just didn't feel the same. And maybe that's partially because I grew up, we were young parents. I was in my early 20s when I had my first baby, and my whole life was around how do I do these spiritual acts as a mom, So then when your kids are gone, it's like, okay, now I'm just a normal person. Even though I'm still a mom today on this Sunday evening, it's just me. Even when Jeff is gone or traveling, do I still sit down? Yes, I found that I have to, because when I don't, then I feel like I'm missing something, So sometimes I do my devotions like a nerd by myself, and it's fine.
Yeah.
I don't have any followers. But that's all part of kind of growing and figuring out how you evolve on that list where we talked about all the different kind of households.
Well, yeah, you're
when you look at it,
definitely-
you're going to be different. You're going to be
gonna
a
be
different
in-
household at different stages of your life.
Yes.
You're
you know?
definitely that grown-up nuclear oscillating between a couple household, right?
Yeah,
So like you're
right.
slowly learning what that means. And what's
Yeah.
interesting is, so some people, they start out as single household, then they move to a roommate household, and then maybe they move back to
Nuclear.
a
Yeah.
single, and then
Yeah.
eventually it becomes a couple,
Right.
right?
Right.
And then it becomes a nuclear,
Yeah.
and then it's grown-up nuclear couple, and you're like, wait a second,
Wait a
I've
minute,
been
how-
here. You
yeah.
know, all these different
Yeah.
things.
Well, but what I think is cool too is as my girls are growing up, especially seeing it with my daughter who's almost ready to leave
Almost
my
ready.
nest, but watching her interact in other places with other
so cool,
people
yeah.
and seeing her do some of those things that we've done in our household that she's extending out.
Mm-hmm.
And that is amazing. I mean, so maybe she's not sitting around our table as often, but we are very blessed that she is playing her sport in a group that is got a Christian foundation and they're praying before practice and those
Yeah.
so she is getting those things. But with those girls, she's got this other little household of friendship,
Yep.
friends, right? And they're
Right.
going to dinner together
Mm-hmm.
and they're having
so cool to watch
conversations
that.
together. And it's amazing to watch
Yeah.
that change.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I would love to just speak to the teenagers, the high school students right now, because their generation is so pressured to be well-rounded and to do all the things and to put it
Right.
on the resume and to try this, to do that, to this is your only opportunity and you better try. And it just, they are emotionally, physically, mentally, absolutely drained. So in our households, wherever you have those connections to these kids who are being, pulled into playing year-round club sports and this off-season thing and this choir and this volunteer hours and da-da-da-da, wherever you can show them and teach them how to cut boundaries that are healthy and
How
to
rest.
prioritize
It goes back to that.
to prioritize their spiritual disciplines, you are going to give them the gift of having that practice and being able to say, no, this is what I need, and that is extra that I don't.
Yep.
Because we're all experiencing, we have difficulty making those calls for ourselves at times.
Yes.
And we can feel it when it's off balance. And maybe it's been off balance for years. But when we get things back on balance, or when we say, you know what, our family could go do this awesome thing, or, maybe this person in our family could be doing this. But right now, we're off balance. And here's, we need to cut some things out, or we need to trim back, or we need to amplify our hospitality, or we need to amplify our spiritual difference or our prayer life together. And we're going to do what's necessary and move stuff to make this a priority. Because our
really-
students have such a hard time saying no.
Well,
And
and I
it's
think
really the
it's-
gift of no. It's teaching
Well,
yes.
the kids that you have the right and almost
responsibility to yourself,
responsibility
yeah.
to say no when it doesn't work for you.
Well, and that's what's been so with when your kids are like going through all these things in high school. Well, they get invited to join this club, and you're invited to join this, and you're
And it's
invited.
great.
So it is, but my daughter and I have had lots of conversations. Okay, let's think about what is it that is your priority right
Right.
now. You need to have time to breathe. You
Yep.
can't constantly be going, it looks good, sounds good.
Yeah.
But you
Yeah.
can't.
But it just
You
goes-
have to take time to breathe.
It goes back to boundaries. And like, it's interesting. My first year here, I was so fed up with the pressure that's put on these kids to do all these different
yeah.
things that I had a series in the January, February timeframe called Let's Be Real. And I brought in college counselors. I was like,
Right.
I'm gonna bring in, I brought 3 colleges in admissions counselors to straight up answer any questions anybody had. And I loved that all 3 of them, we had A&M, we had LSU, we had a small D3 college. I believe I had my alma mater, so maybe I had like 4. And every single one of them said, I mean, as far as admissions goes, it's just your grades.
Right.
And it was like, and so
Yeah.
they did acknowledge, like, yeah, if you're going for some pretty big scholarships and things like that, like beyond academic scholarships,
Yeah.
like, yeah, some of those things are important. Like the well-roundedness is always appreciated and things like that. But at the end of the day, when it came down to whether or not I'm going to get into this school, which is the giant fear, it was just the grades. Every single one of them across the board.
And
Wow.
you don't have to be in all of the major top classes. Every class you take doesn't have to be a dual credit
you and I have
class.
talked about
And
that so many times.
So because
yeah.
my daughter, she's
it's a fallacy.
academically very smart. I mean, like school comes easy. In fact, I love that she plays a sport because that doesn't
balances.
come easy
Right.
for her. And that's where she has, but that's where her love is right now.
Yeah.
Like she loves it. And she's in an environment where Jesus is invited into it.
Yes.
So, I mean, we've got this kind of well-rounded things, but for her, that meant, okay, then we're not playing the GPA game at school. We're not going to try to get the highest point. We don't care if we are.
Yeah, and
eighth
it's,
grade
you know,
valedictorian over there, huh?
She, I mean, she really, she's, and she didn't, we didn't even know that. Like,
Yeah,
school
yeah. I remember
just
y'all being so
comes
surprised
easy.
that
We
night,
really
yeah.
were.
And you guys
So-
are, I've had this conversation with you
Yeah.
specifically about how it does kind of take the love of something away when you go to high school and you think, I have to be in the advanced version of every single class. You don't learn to foster what you really love, right? So I tell kids every time we talk about picking classes for high school, I'm like, what do you love about school? I love math. Take advanced math.
Exactly.
Pour your passion and your commitment into something that you love. It's a lesson that us as adults can give kids because that translates to your spiritual life at home, right? If that's what you love is that time and commitment to being together in a spiritual way at home, then you pour yourself into that, right? And I think so many times they divide themselves for things that they don't really care about or they don't love. If kids don't love to read, don't take advanced placement English,
right.
Like that is such a hard thing for some parents to hear.
And we're
though.
so afraid that if we
Oh, my
don't
goodness.
force our kids to do X,
They're
Y,
gonna be
and Z, then
behind
they're
or-
going to be a
yes.
failure
Oh,
at life, and
it's
their
just
life
not
will be
true.
ruined, and they
Yeah.
won't be prepared. And that's just you're right. It's
not
just
true.
not
yeah, it's
true.
a fallacy that we perpetuate when we go along with it, even though we know it's not true.
There's a layer to which like teachers want kids to take their classes.
Yeah.
Counselors want kids. I mean, that's the thing is I think a lot of credit goes to us on that side of things. But like I can only speak to my experience, which was 15 years ago. Wrap your brain around that.
That's
but
not
like,
so long ago.
It was forever ago. But like, I mean, my parents were not, my parents, I was number 3. They didn't have the capacity to walk alongside of me in anything. So I paid my own way. And at the end of the day, why did I was that kid that was involved in multiple sports, never at the same time, multiple clubs, leaders of all these clubs. Like I was the annoying tassels kid at graduation. And
I love it.
thankfully college like humbled me
Yeah.
tremendously. And I learned what matters, what doesn't matter. But I took the challenging classes, things like that. But why? Why did I take AP classes? Why did I take honors classes? Because I was bored. Right? I needed something that was going to challenge me. Now, did I take all the AP classes? No. I remember one of my favorite teachers. I was in honors chemistry, and I loved asking questions, still do. And I remember constantly being told, we'll learn about that in AP Chem. We'll learn about that in AP Chem. And I told her, she was my homeroom teacher that year too. And I was like, look, I'm not going to take AP Chem if you don't answer these questions for me. And guess what?
She did.
I did not.
Oh, you did not. There you
She
go.
wanted. She was, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna like cave into that because I didn't need it. I didn't
Right.
need AP Chem. I wasn't interested in AP Chem. Kind of like you said,
Yeah.
learning what you're interested in. What's so fascinating, I became an English major in college, right? So at the end of my freshman year was an English major, and I took honors language arts or literature. I took AP English, but if you would have asked my teachers,
Right.
and maybe not, if you would have just asked me if I was going to be an English major when I was in high school, I would have laughed at you wholeheartedly. But thankfully, I had a teacher, 3 years, 3 out of my 4 years had the same teacher, different classes, different levels, that just entertained my questions. And I loved it. I got so invested in the conversations and things like that I appreciated a love for it. I just didn't have the gifts to get the grades like everybody else did. So it was not that I was like getting 100 and that's why I chased it down. It's just because I was interested in it. And it paid off well when I finally got off to college too.
Yeah.
And I wanted to circle back to one thing before we kind of see where this chapter closes, because I think it connects some of the dots too. Like when you were talking about boundaries as a family, Jan, and like we were calling out coaches and being able to say in our family, in our home, and I was reminiscing that you were sharing from a ministry perspective, like with your own kids, that it's not for everybody. I want to echo that, because I've had times where a family will come to me and say, in our family, Sunday nights are our time that we're actually able to be together. And I say, more power
That's
to
great.
you.
Yes.
You have boundaries. You have something beneficial that you're doing. Now, it's harder for me. It was deeply harder for me when it's sports, messing with a confirmation weekend or something like that. That is more hard for me. But at the same time, like I know there's also family
Value.
situations. If there's a single family and things like that, we have to move things around, and we're happy to do that. But just pursue those things that are actually going to
have a
bring
lasting
meaning
impact,
and
yeah.
have that. Yeah, exactly. And it goes back to where this chapter wraps up, which is talking about those, in summary, the messy prayers, loud tables, and open doors. And on the final page of this chapter, it's basically asking this question: is this possible for us? And I have a feeling we have some listeners that are asking that question, like, look, that
Right.
sounded so challenging and so convicted. I'm not there yet. I see all the mess. We're not even close. Like the chapter emphasizes towards the end that like when all three of these things are present, that's the spiritually vibrant home. When one of them is missing, it's not. And you're like, oh gosh, I might
know.
barely have a half of one.
Yeah.
If
Or how do I get them all at the same time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's the great news for you guys as you keep listening, keep reading. As you'll hear, next episode, the next chapter is going to break down the first one of those messy prayers. And Don does such an amazing job of saying, here's what a baby step looks like. Here's what the next step looks like. And here's what the full force version of this. And he uses great illustrations the whole way through. But on this last page 76, I appreciate it. He's saying, this isn't me trying to be inspirational. This is what the data suggests. And what I'm saying is that it is possible. Right? For every single one of the households they did engage, the potential for you to take a baby step and get to spiritual vibrancy is possible. And it's not because he's trying to be inspirational or he's trying to manipulate us or something to keep reading his book. It's because the data backs it up. And I'll go to, it says, as they put it another way, because it makes a quote that's a little complicated. But for the most part, spiritual vibrancy is not determined by unchangeable characteristics, but by things any Christian can improve.
Right.
Right?
So
And
I love the quote on 75 where he says, the research suggests that the answer is yes, you can do this. It says God can make magic in all kinds of faithful households.
I have that highlighted
I
because
love that.
God can do it. It's not what
Yes.
we're doing.
Right.
God can do it. Do we have
Yes.
to make some choices? Yes. But if we start with God, then it can
Right.
happen.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily us.
And as
I think
hear-
that should be like a sign on.
I think so too.
Okay,
I may
yes,
need that
office.
in my house.
Yes, yes.
But as
And sorry. I was just going to add, because right below that, the other thing is that anyone can choose to pursue
Right.
spiritual vibrancy. It's not, you don't have to have some
Certain
major gift.
starting
You don't have to be a
place, yeah.
teacher. You don't have to work in the church. You don't have to, have kids at
Exactly.
home.
Anybody.
You don't have to have this huge house.
Or a relationship even. You could be on
Yeah.
your own. Yeah.
Seriously,
right,
anyone
not the
can do it.
unchangeable characteristics.
And God can
Right.
make the magic happen.
Wherever you're at. And
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, I got the joy of being able to participate with our varsity boys basketball program here at the school. And every day we end with a quote, and Steve Brennan would kill me if he knew I couldn't tell you who it is. That it
Wooden.
It is John Wooden? Okay. So John Wooden says, success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction and knowing that you did your best to become the best you're capable of becoming. So at the end of the day, success, when it comes to all of these things, everything in life, just ask yourself, are you doing
Doing
the
your
best you
best.
can? Like that's the only measure you need to do, because that if you're doing your best, it's going to give you peace of mind because it's a direct result of the self-satisfaction knowing that you did your best. And so that's all it's really asking us to do.
Yeah. Do your best, knowing that God has it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Knowing,
not you.
Knowing that,
Right.
you give your best to him and he'll work magic. He will take it, and he loves when we offer it to him and when we try to give him our life and our attention.
And there's this marriage in here about the data and the magic, right?
Right,
And it's
right.
like it feeds both ways because there is so much data to say yes, this happens.
It's
This
possible.
is possible. This is what we see. This is what we found. But then there's this factor where God is moving mountains in
Yes.
your home,
Yeah.
despite whatever you come to the table with.
And he promised, like in his word, he promises.
Yep.
Yeah.
Seek me, and you'll find me when you seek me with all your heart. If my people would pray, and like all of these promises, God is saying, put these spiritual disciplines in place. Right? Talk about me with your children when you wake up, when you go to sleep. All of this stuff is promises, and welcome people. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those are what he asks, and he says, and I will be faithful to move in those things. This book is just highlighting that, God is doing in spiritually vibrant homes, God is doing what he said he would do in his word.
And he wants to do it in ours. And all we have to do is invite him in.
He's
to do it.
excited.
Yeah,
He
he wants to be there.
Is thrilled. He's honored when we put him first.
And do your best. And I only reiterate that because notice what we're not saying. It's not doing the best as someone else.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
So it's not like this devotion queen over
Yeah.
here, right? Oh, she's
Yeah,
such
that's
a
not
devotion
me.
queen. That's not me, right? It's saying, okay, but whatever your best is in that moment, God knows you. God knows your circumstances. God knows where you are, and he's inviting you just to trust him with what he's given you in
Yeah.
those moments.
And,
to
and
watch
some
him go to
people are
work.
bored by what intrigues another person. Like for me, the devotion, my devotion life speaks to like other stories, right? Because a lot of devotions center around someone else's story. In a lot of ways, there's devotions within this book, right? A story of Jerry and
Yes,
right?
absolutely,
Like
yeah.
that's
Yep.
kind of what devotions. That's why devotions speak to me in that way. But one of my sisters is totally bored with that. She's like, that didn't relate to me. Like she doesn't see the story. She's like, well, no, I don't have that, or it doesn't. I didn't go on a trip, or whatever the devotion may be about, I don't connect with. And so that doesn't work for you. And that's another thing I think it's important to remember when you're trying to be spiritually vibrant in your home is that you have to find your groove. What makes your family tick, and what does your family enjoy, and what speaks to your family's style and your family's relationships and things like that. Not everybody is going to love a good devotion
Some
time.
families
like I
might
do.
like to sing
Start
hymns
with
around
God.
the piano.
Wherever
and
he comes
some
in,
might
just make
not
sure it's
at
God.
all.
Yeah.
Right,
And it's funny for me
exactly.
to hear you go family, family, family. And after this chapter, I want to be like, your spouse, your roommate,
Right.
your whoever's listening right now, and encourage your kids to do the same as they get to grow up and experience
Exactly.
what that's like.
Yeah.
What does it mean for you to take these practices that we're going to do in whatever time God
Right.
has for you? Because you're not at the end of wherever you're at, you're not at the end of the journey yet.
No.
Right? God's still got time in front of you. Use it. Again,
Yep.
whether you're a grandparent experiencing that couple household, or you're on the front end too. Like every single one is invited into this. And that's where Don's going to take us. And you guys, some of you guys are going, man, these pregame chapters, there's so much to talk about, so much to reflect. It's such a big picture. We get to narrow it down and talk very specifically, starting with chapter 4, messy prayers, helping our households relate to God. That's the preview for next week. And again, I love how step by step it is. You're going to get some really practical, super, super practical, nitty gritty. This is an idea for you and your household. Take it or leave it. A practical way to evaluate where you are as a metric on which step are you, and things like that. So no matter where you're at, this is definitely for you. I invite you to keep on listening. And as you keep on listening, certainly invite you to email us, raiseemup@trinitycline.org, or find us on Facebook. Engage in the conversation there, Raise 'em Up Podcast on Facebook. I was about to say @trinitycline.org. That's not an email address. That's just finding us on Facebook. But just to continue the conversation, we've definitely enjoyed the opportunity to be able to connect about this topic. And so hope that you keep enjoying listening to it as we continue. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.